Alright, so we're running through and doing a bunch of the little odds and ends. The first on that list was getting the exhaust to stay perpendicular with this. Because of how I drilled it, the holes were drilled like that, so I had to kind of widen them out and make them a little bit bigger, and it didn't allow the pipes to stand up straight. So to get that to work, I created this little chunk of wood, just drops in there and holds them in the upright position. And then for the positioning on these, I'm going to put them at the same angle as the sides of the hood. I was trying to figure out how I wanted to do it, but it looked pretty good. And this is the pushcat one. The other one has the actual flappy exhaust. There was another thing that I noticed when I was looking at the photos of the real machine, and this was something that I had intended on doing earlier and I totally forgot about, but on the D11R, you can see it's got this little drop down in here. The N model had had a steel guard that went over that, so I created it out of brass. It just sits over there. And it was pretty easy to do. Just took a piece of brass, punched a hole in it, that handy dandy punch, so that I can create two of these based on it. And for this I did my usual, I can pick it up, just I used a piece of thin cardstock to create what I needed. So it adds a bit of detail. Because of how this is shaped, I had to angle it in a bit, but I couldn't find good enough photos to find out if it actually does that or not. And then this gap that's in there, I will fill with putty. Alright, let's get this piece attached. What's going on with this putty? I think it might be time to get a new thing of it. Alright. Slower cure super glue and our piece. Alright, so let's talk about lights. The lights that came with the D11 are terrible. If you look at them, they look like game board pieces. They're really big, oversized. The detail is pretty bad, so I'm not going to use these. Now I was thinking of using these lights, which came from a D8. They're a little bit more appropriate size, but again, the detail is not really that great. So I'm going to make lights from scratch, which requires me cutting out little squares of brass and inserting a piece of brass tubing into it so that I can drop in these pseudo lenses. These will be a little bit more visible once I get them out of the package, but basically they're miniature fake diamonds. I have them in both 4mm and 2mm, and it was like $4 for all of those, and I got them on eBay. The problem I was running into is getting consistent cuts for this metal. The only ways that I have to cut metal are either by hand with a little razor saw that I have, and getting perfectly symmetrical cuts was really difficult, so I tried it on the bandsaw. However, the bandsaw is not meant for this type of cutting, and none of the cuts came out very straight either. So I had to resort to our old friends. You know them, I know them. Harbor Freight. Now, they are not the best tools in the world, but I do not have the money for an expensive version of this right now, so I had to buy what I can get. This thing cost about $40, and it does everything that I need it to do. Now, is it the best in its class? Absolutely not. A lot of people complain about these overheating, and I can definitely see why. It's encased in super thick plastic. It's got these little vents in the back, which are useless because there isn't really any sort of impeller to pull air through to cool the motor. But if you're not trying to cut like a million tubes in the course of 20 minutes, then you're probably cool. I'm using this to cut about 8 of those squares, and I've cut about 7 of them so far. No, 5 of them so far. So I will resume cutting the rest of them. Not the safest piece of equipment either. I don't know if you can see what the blade is right here. It's unplugged, by the way. The blade is quite obvious and quite close to the handle. So if you're not paying attention, you go to grab the handle, and if you have hands bigger than mine, there's a good potential that you can grab this guy, or if you're riding or coming in, it's quite easy to hit that. To lower it down, you have to hit this release to drop it, which is kind of a pain in the butt. Especially if you're trying to like control the drop down speed, which I use this kind of as a fulcrum point. But other than that, I've got no quarrels with it. My cat can't figure out how to open a door. You should come in the room if you don't want to be in here. Get out. Is there anything else? This board is relatively accurate. I had to do a few practice cuts to dial it in, but it's pretty on the money. And I think that's about it. Comes with a little clamp to hold on the table. For 40 bucks, you can't beat it. It's pretty straightforward. Alright, so we have all of the pieces for our light frames cut out. The little circles will drop inside there. There's 4 missing because they are on the drill press. Alright, so let's see how these lights look mocked up. Here's a little bit of a comparison for you guys. You can see the home-built ones on the cylinder right here, and then the big old goofy Mickey Mouse ears on this one. Definitely looks a lot better. Alright, so let's talk about hydraulic hose. This is a question that I see come up frequently on the forum, and it's a question that took me a lot of research and digging around to find things that I like to use for hydraulic hose, and a lot of it depends on what's on the market. There's a lot of things that are sold for bead making and jewelry making that are applicable to hoses, and they come and go with the market. So let's start with solid types of material that you can use for hoses. So I have this right here. This is actually part of my ear protection. It's a little tube that holds it all together so you don't lose your earplugs, and this is a solid type of, let me zoom out here a little bit because that's not working. That's the wrong way, Steven. This is actually translucent, but there are these type of, they call it gel cord, there's a few other names for it, and it's sold for making jewelry, bracelets, necklaces, so on and so forth. Happens to also be on my earplugs, and I've seen this in the store in solid black. The pros of this stuff, it retains its shape. It doesn't kink or anything like that. The cons is that it is solid all the way through, so if you plan on trying to insert brass into it to fix it in place, and we'll go over that later, you're kind of limited with this stuff, and it's sometimes difficult to find. There was a company that used to make that stuff, but they no longer carry it, so yeah, it's kind of difficult to find. The next thing is hobby tube. Now, this is another one that's really difficult to find. This came with a 1/24 scale truck that I built, and it was part of the detailing for the kit. It has a small 0.5 millimeter hole in there, and the exterior, or I should say the diameter of this is about 0.5 inches. It's really nice, but it's kind of too big of a scale. Let's grab one of our little hydraulic hoses here. I'm sure that that could be used for it, but it's a little oversized. Something like this might be good for maybe a big mining excavator, but as far as use on this model, it's not going to suffice. Silicone. I found this stuff on eBay. It's for fishing. It's for tying up rigs, something like that. I'm a very amateur fisherman, so I wouldn't even know how to use this stuff. Pros, it's super stretchy, very durable. It has a hole at the end of it, so you can use it to insert a piece of brass on the inside if you wanted to drill a hole into a hydraulic and get the hose to stick in there. Cons, again, is the thickness of it. The inner diameter is 0.5, and the exterior diameter is about 1. I think I measured it out about 1.2. Cons. Silicone does not age well at all. This part is nice and shiny black because I've been messing with it and it's all greased up from finger oil. But as you look down the line, it kind of starts to turn this silver color. I don't know if that's showing up on the camera or not, but it doesn't seem to age very well. So this is not an option that I would suggest. Teflon. This stuff looks great. This is Teflon tubing. It's about a millimeter thick, and this is what I used on one of my previous builds. I used it on an excavator. It looks great until you get it on and you get it into a point where the hose needs to kink, and what happens? That. It sucks. It's too thin-walled, and it doesn't recover once it gets kinked. You can literally mash this stuff up and it doesn't return to form. It looks like doo-doo. And if you have that model that I built, if you were watching this, just so happened, I do greatly apologize for installing this stuff on that model, and shoot me an email and I will cut you some new hose and send it to you. Now let's get to the stuff that I like to use, and this is, I think, one of the highest suggested materials, and this is just good old electric wire. Now there's two types of wire. There is the type that has the multi-strand, and I'm not an electrician, so I apologize to anybody who knows about this stuff and is facepalming right now, but has the multiple fibers inside of wire. And then there is the solid core, which is this stuff. This stuff's easy to find, and I didn't quite realize it because I didn't know what it was called. It has a single copper core, or solid copper core, and it's cool because if you want hoses for something static that's never going to move, you can bend it into shape and then you can drill a hole and then insert this into the hole and you have it anchored. Or if you want to use this for hydraulic hoses, it comes off very easy. I just use my fingernails and it pulls right off, and now I have a hole that I can take a piece of 0.5 millimeter brass and insert it in there. The outside collar is big enough that I can take a piece of 1.5 millimeter tubing, put it on the outside. Of course, it doesn't want to do it for demo purposes, and make a collar for it. This is honestly, I think, the best stuff that's out there. This whole roll cost $4. I got it on eBay, but I've also found it in hobby shops. And it comes in a multitude of colors. I also purchased it in white for one of the previous models that I built because I painted it the same color as the model. You'll notice a lot of at least Caterpillar machines, when they come from the factory, Cat paints the hoses cat yellow. The problem with this stuff is your paint has to be flex ready. And on another one of the models that I built, I did notice that the paint was starting to come off of this a little bit. Now that could be either an error on my part of not prepping it correctly, maybe not using the right primer, or that it was a paint that shouldn't be flexed. So I'm probably just going to start going with black hose now. It makes it a little bit easier. Most machines, once they get rebuilt or they blow a hose, the owner is going to replace it with black hose anyways. So it's not too far off in the realism, but it's great because this stuff always keeps its color. It doesn't kink. I'm sure I could like put this in a vise and crush it down and kink it, but under normal circumstances, it doesn't kink. So it always looks pretty decent, and scale-wise, it works. It works with just about everything that's out there. This is 22 gauge, and I tried finding 24 gauge, but I couldn't find anything out there that was 24. So yeah, this is what I recommend using, and it's so easy to get it off of the core that's in there. With the ones that are the multi-strand, those seem to kind of tear and get stuck on the inside when you try to unsheath it, and it creates a bit of a problem. I have a lot of scrap here. I probably shouldn't waste so much of this. I think that's about it. So let's get to building stuff. Alright, so let's install the holes in the back for the inputs for the hoses coming off of the body. This part right here on the full scale machine is actually a shield, but I don't feel like grinding that off and rebuilding it, so I'm just going to throw holes in the back. I'm not going for deep holes because I don't want to go in too far. All right. Alright, so for the standard dozer, there's this little bar that connects the, let me grab it here, arm to the undercarriage of the dozer. Now on the real size dozer, this, I'm going to call it a torque bar, connects to the back of the blade, but on the model it connects in over here. And it's what carries the hydraulic hoses that go to the tilt cylinders. This one has 2 tilt cylinders, and they would run down through the inside of this. So what my original plan was for the hoses on this is this is supposed to be like a mock-up of the hood that covers the hoses as they go in to protect them. And what I was going to do, because I have 4 hoses running in, I drilled holes in there and I was going to loop this through, have it run up to the grill where the hoses will go in, and then I had this cowl that I was going to glue in place over it like that. And it would have worked out except for the fact that this would have just been glued on, and the only points of contact would have been right there and then on the inside, and then I would have had to do that on the other side. I don't have a lot of faith in glue's ability to stay put when it comes to really small contact points like that in metal. All it would take is to knock it once and it would come off. And also I would have had to put these hoses in first and then mask them up and paint it that way, and then take the mask off, because I couldn't paint this separately then try to glue it on later. It just wouldn't have worked out right. So what I ended up doing was knocking out a custom built version of that. I had a spare one of those bars, and I used my milling machine, my DIY milling machine, and took this tube, brass tube, and put in these 2 channels. And then this is my spare bar I cut way down, and that inserts on this end. And you can see the it's got a little bit of a ramped angle on it. Of course it's going to make a liar out of me. A little bit of a ramped angle so I can run the 4 hoses down in there, and then I have this scrap piece of metal that I cut another angle on, and this will go into the end here. And then that way when I run the hoses through, they can come back up and out this side. And then this part is made out of brass, so connecting the hood is going to be just a matter of soldering it on, and it's going to ensure that it doesn't get knocked off. And we'll have a custom built piece. This thing's still a little bit long because I needed to leave myself some adjustability just in case I made this either too short or too long. But that's it in a nutshell, and then the hoses will run out of here and along the back of the blade, and then also to the tilt cylinders. Alright, time to create the mounting brackets for the hoses that are going to run along the back of the blade. 2 pieces of tubing here and a little strip of brass. And I'm going to go ahead and do the old lazy man solder job here. Oh, that didn't work. That was a great sound. I'm sorry, guys. Dude, what the hell? Stay down. That is a lot of solder. I think that might hold. We'll see. Well, these turned out pretty well. I was able to get 4 lengths of that. And then I just slid this this 1 millimeter tubing through it. And it's got the 0.4 or 0.5 millimeter inner diameter. So I can attach the hose to it, and then it will get glued on here with these 2 guard pieces that will go right there. None of this is, the casting on this blade is very symmetrical. I'm not going to bother gluing it on or using any sort of measuring to put this on here. I'm just going to eyeball it straight. My eyeball is pretty good at doing that. And when I tried to measure it out based on any of the lines that were on here, it didn't come out straight anyways because the casting is a little bit wonky. Alright. Grab it from the ends here. The reference point that I'm going to use to line all this up with is the little attachment points on the bottom of the blade. In there, sand it up. That looks straight to me. Alright, got a little mock-up action going here. There's two reasons I mock my models up. The first of which, I like to see what it looks like with all this stuff that I built in place, or in this case, most of the stuff that I built in place. And the other reason I mock these up is because I want to see if there's anything that's going to be a problem before I paint it. And I found a few minor engineering fails on this, and I will show you what they are. Let me unsaddle the camera here. Alright. So first thing is I am not very good at moving a camera. Let's see what we got here. Alright. This little guy likes to rub right against there, so what I'm going to need to do is break the glue contact right there and then roll that bar forwards because this piece is going to rub against the grill and we don't want that. The second engineering fail is on the door. Actually, let's just put this guy back on the tripod. Alright. The second engineering fail is the hinge on the door is not working right. It's kind of sticking and I don't want it to do that because it will break the little pins that I built. So we're going to address that in a second. But when I have the door closed, I got to make sure that when I install this, that this bar is pushed in far enough because the door hits it. Yeah. So that kind of makes the whole opening and closing doors pointless if I can't get them to go past the grab rail. Alright, so it is painting time and I have procured one of these handy dandy, see them all over the internet, little airbrush stations, which we'll go over later. But right now it's prep time. I'm not going to do much on the painting process, and the reason why is because I am not an experienced painter. This will be probably my third time using an airbrush. I usually use spray cans for all my stuff, and but I am pretty good at prep work and masking, so I will cover a lot of that stuff. All right, let's do some dishes. Not really. So just a warm, soapy bath here. Now, if you're gonna scrub this stuff at all, if you got like oil and grease on there, one of the big mistakes that I made with this project and my paint prep thus far was not keeping my finished parts away from my workbench. I mean, space is limited in my little office here, so everything kind of had to sit, excuse me, up close. But what I should have done is as soon as I finished a piece, I should have like put it away in a box or something to keep it away from all of the oil and the dust that comes from
my workshop. It probably would have made it a lot easier for this part of it in regards to getting all this stuff clean. But this is just some dish soap and then warm water to rinse it off with. And then my hands are obviously washed prior to this, and I have forgotten to get myself out a towel. So I'm going to put out a towel, finish doing this stuff, and then I'll catch you guys up on the next stage. So right now I am just doing the larger pieces. I'm not doing any of the small detailed stuff yet. I will do all of these little pieces later. Just still continuing on with this stuff. I just don't want to get everything mixed up, and I also want to wait for the foam in the wash to clear out so that I can see all the little parts when they're down at the bottom there. But when you're using the brush, if you're scrubbing, try not to scrub anything that looks like you might like flick levers or rails off of. Make sure everything's secured pretty good. And don't use really hot water either, because it could have negative effects on your super glue, and it could even warp thinner plastics. So just warm water is all you need. Alright, so we got everything here washed. Still got a little bit more work to do, but I wanted to show you how gross the water is. And a lot of this is my fault again for leaving, see all the schmutz and the dust and debris and grossness down in there? A lot of dirt. So next time I'm not leaving these parts on the workbench after I've completed them. Move them off, hopefully spare them from some dust so I don't have to clean as much stuff off. Man, that's a lot of stuff. Ooh, we got our work cut out for us. Yup. Alright, I want to cover primer, tape, and prep, and then we're just going to jump right into this and I'll shut up. So first of all, let's cover tape. There are tons of different tapes out there. My favorite type of tape for this kind of stuff is the blue. Blue usually indicates like a medium tack, though make sure you read the package because some stuff has a harder hold. And then there's also like this purple tape right here, which is an extremely low tack tape, and this is good for putting over stuff that you're going to be painting. So if you're putting stripes on something, and then there's this really nice fine detail stuff that is made from Tamiya, and it is a little bit more of a tack. I'd say probably closer to the range of the blue, but it doesn't hold on as much as this. So if you're going to like say paint a big side of something, you can lay this down first and then seal the edge of it with the Tamiya tape. You'll see me laying tape down and then taking the edge of either a toothpick or a skewer like this, and what I'm doing is burnishing the edge down. The reason I'm using this is because it's soft and shouldn't mess up paint that's already there or scratch the model, and it lays a nicer edge on the edge of the tape. And when I do it, it's usually best to kind of roll in a direction moving across the edge of that tape, and this basically helps you seal the edge down onto the model. Lots of different primers out there on the market. My favorites so far have been the Tamiya surface primers. They come in a fine primer and a regular primer. I find that they're just about the same. This stuff is really good for if you're painting over something with a lot of detail on it, detail that you don't want to lose. Say if you're painting over a grill and you want to keep the details of that grill in your paint job. But this is going to do pretty much the same job. I picked both of these up to try them out, and I found them to be both pretty sufficient. These also lay down a much lighter mist, so there's not much of a need to decant these if you're going to be airbrushing. So those are really great. If you're going to be doing priming on spots like this where I'm going to need to blend lines together, I like to use heavier stuff like this. This stuff is not something that I would use on a spot where I need more detail because this lays down a lot of paint. And if you want, you can decant this stuff, and we'll go over decanting later, and use this in your airbrush. And then there's specialty primers, and some of these I think are not worth the money. I tried these out, bought these to check them out as well. This is a primer that's designed specifically for putting on metal directly, but if you read the bottles of the other primer that I have, they also state that they're for use on metal. This says you can top coat in minutes. That is complete horse crap. I used this stuff on my previous model and I was like, oh cool, I just can lay this down and top coat in minutes. Do not do that. Let your primer cure. I made the mistake of doing that and it made my paint super soft and it took it even longer to cure. Then there is this stuff. This is a primer that is designed to be used before the Caterpillar yellow paint. This stuff is great, but it lays on heavy. This would be good if you were going to paint something large and then we're something that was like a darkened color. Say if I wanted to convert this black grill to Caterpillar yellow, this stuff is nice to lay down. It covers a lot and then you can go over it with the Caterpillar yellow paint, but honestly I haven't really found a use for it because the gray primers work just as well. But it was fun to pick it up, to check it out, to see how it worked. As far as prepping, I'm just going to roll right into it, but I have a box set up that's got a piece of foam in it and I'm going to be taping various items to these skewers here, like this guy is going to get taped on there. Other options that you can do is like take pieces of scrap wood and drill holes in it and then drop in the parts that you're not going to be painting into there, and then you can hold this obviously gloved up and spray paint that and then set it into your drying station. But the big block of foam that I have in there, which I received a lovely ham in, is going to allow me to just stuff these right down into the foam and let these sit in the box and cure for as long as I need them to. I took and cut the skewers in half and then sharpened the end of the one that didn't already have a point on it on my disc center. I think I used my paper center for a few as well. Even though the plastic parts are already yellow, they look like plastic, so I'm going to repaint them. I think it looks much better with the plastic being painted. To make sure things like the ends of my hoses don't get filled up with paint, I've taken in, put little bits of wire in there. That will save me from having to clear paint out of that later when I go to insert my hydraulic hoses. Alright, we got everything masked up and mounted and ready for paint. Took a long time. Took probably about 4 hours to do all this. Some stuff was much easier, but the stuff that required masking took a little bit longer. And also I had to install some parts like the levers that you see inside the interiors. Alright, so let's get painty around here. Let's give it a try. Right, so I've completed my first run through on my priming, and now I'm just going through and checking for spots where my bodywork wasn't quite as smooth as I thought it was. So I'm going through and fixing up spots where I needed to sand it down a little bit smoother. A lot of times it's really hard to see if you did a good job on your bodywork until you lay down that first coat of primer, and this matte finish really shows you all the spots where you missed or didn't do enough body work. And then I laid down a little bit of filler and then also decanted some primer into a little cup and brushed that on in areas where I needed a little bit of a thicker fill. And now I'm just going back over with these sanding sticks and wet sanding it. I wasn't sure if these were waterproof or not, but it seems like they're relatively at least water resistant, so I've been able to dip them in water and use that to help pull away some of the debris as I do my sanding. Alright, let's go over our second coat here of primer. One thing I didn't mention about this style of paint booth, if you're doing this indoors and you are using like the lacquer style paints that I'm using right now, your house will still smell like paint if you're drying this stuff indoors. But the majority of the smell goes away. I did dry a whole bunch of stuff inside though. And when I came back from shopping, my house did faintly smell like paint. The wifey, not so happy, but that's alright. Let me just shake this in your guys' ears. Just looking over the paint while it's still glossy to see if there's any runs or any spots where I missed, or that I'm going to need to lay down another layer. Looks good. Might need another little wet sand before I do my final, or before I do my paint coat. It looks good. Alright, so while I'm waiting for that primer to cure, I figured it'd be a good time to decant some paint, since I'm going to try using an airbrush this time instead of a spray can. Caterpillar has changed the design of the nozzle tips that they put on their spray can. These are great for spray painting because this little red part you can actually take and you can pop that right out, and it's really easy to clean. And then this cap comes off and you can pull out this pin, which makes that part really easy to clean. But it makes it difficult to fit a straw in place to decant the paint. But I found that this straw does fit over that relatively well. So I'm going to try this method first, and then we're going to spray it directly into there. I'm going to turn the fan on to pull the propellant out of my room. Good try. Let's shake it up here. Alright, so I got about 2.5 ounces out of this. I think there's a little bit more in the can. I'm not going to fret over it right now. Let's turn this off so you guys can hear me. Okay, so this isn't exactly ready to go yet. I will need to thin it out, but before that I have to degas it because there is still some propellant left inside the paint. I can let it sit for probably 24 hours like this and that might work, but I'm going to use something else to do that. Apologies in advance for the shoddy camera work. So this is my home built vacuum chamber. Let me back it up here. Oh, what a surprise, more Harbor Freight stuff. So have a basic 2.5 CFM vacuum pump here connected to a pressure release valve. Screw that down. Threaded into a very thick piece of plexiglass, and it runs out to pressure indicator. And then I have a thick aluminum. Don't get a crappy pot. My first one was a thinner aluminum pot, and it had just the teeniest little dent in the side, and the whole thing soda canned when I turned it on. So this is a thicker, heavy-duty one. And then for the gasket, this is a piece of silicone hosing. It was a piece of an old Camelback hose. I got a new one. I didn't need this anymore, so I figured it would be great for this. I actually used to use a latex one on here, but it broke down and got kind of funky, so I actually haven't gotten a chance to use this one yet, but we're going to give it a go. Let's take and put our paint in there. Are you ready to pump? Here's my gasket's not working as well as I thought it would be. We're watching this number right there. We wanted to get up past 25. I think there's a leak in my system somewhere, because the last time I did this, the pressure went up a little higher. Maybe it didn't go to 29. Maybe I got my numbers wrong. Alright, I think that is about enough of the degassing. I was only able to get about 26 inches HG vacuum out of this. There's definitely a leak somewhere in the system. I'm not sure where it is, but I knocked this thing together pretty quickly a couple years ago, and it's been in the garage. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's leaks in my lines somewhere. I know the pressure relief valve is definitely one of the culprits, because I was able to put my finger over the end of it, and it leaked a little bit. So I'll get a new one of those, but it did a pretty good job of pulling gas out of the stuff. So let's let the pressure out. Woo! So do that a little slower. Good thing it's just plexiglass, huh? Let's try that again. This valve is not very good. Alright, now the big moment. Hopefully you can hear me over the compressor. I have done a few test goes on, gosh darn it, on some other materials, and now I'm ready to give it the, we'll call it a try here. Sorry, I got to push it back so that the suction will actually capture the fumes. A little bit of splatter going on there. So, looks like I need to make sure I pull the trigger off to the side and then allow that splatter to go somewhere other than onto my dozer blade. Alright, so I've done a few pieces so far, and I think I'm ready to give a first impression. First impression of airbrushing after not having done it in probably like 10 years. I think I did a plastic model or two back in the day, but I like it. I'm sold on airbrushing. My finger is not worn out from using a spray can, and I have a nice even coat. I didn't have any issues with overspray at all. It looks good. What I'm not sold on is the airbrush that I have. It's overly complicated, and I think there's simpler, better technology out there. So I don't know if I'll get a new one during the course of this project, but I'm definitely going to get a new one. And also my little compressor, I think, is getting a little too hot. I don't know if it's got what it takes for this. Alright, finally ponied up and got a better airbrush. Pretty well reviewed one. I'll go over it later. It's pretty. However, I'm waiting on some more parts for it, like an air pressure regulator and a cleaning pot and some adapters. So we'll go over that when I get the parts. But for right now, I need to take a look at some of the stuff we already airbrushed. So this guy looks pretty decent, but as you can see, the reflection coming off it isn't that great, and that's because I wasn't able to get a good flow out of that other airbrush. It did a lot of spattering, and there were points where even though I had the action dropped back to full paint, it was not shooting the paint out. Now, whether the paint was too thick for that airbrush or if the airbrush was just goofy and not working right, I don't know. My guess is the airbrush sucked because after I went to clean it, I noticed some parts weren't moving correctly inside it. So that thing is going adios, and I've got a little bit of wet sanding to do here. So I'm going to go over this with some wet sandpaper. Probably going to use a wet 600 grit. No, I think 600 would probably be a little too aggressive. I'll try it with 1,000 first and see how that does, and go over, and I have a better idea of how I want to gun this next time I go to paint. Alright, so new guy here made some new guy airbrushing mistakes, and let me show you what I did. So if you look at the, sorry, I'm looking at the viewfinder so I can make sure you guys see what I see. You can see some little specks and dimples on there. You pull it back a bit. I ended up getting just a teeny bit of fisheyeing in there, but the bigger problem, and it's kind of difficult to see. Oh, there we go. Now you can see it. See all those little specks? That's all paint debris. And why is there paint debris on my freshly painted blade? Because I am a bit impatient. So this is the bottle that I've been using for my paint, and the mistake that I've been making is that I've been using my storage bottle as my mixing bottle. It's a dumb idea because I'm continually adding a new paint source to this, and then I'm adding a thinner to this, and then I'm shaking it in this bottle. And if we open the cap here, we can see that not exactly Mr. Clean. I have all these little bits of dried paint inside the bottle, and every time I go shake it, those little bits of dry paint come out of the lid, off the ring. Every time I take the cap off, those little bits of dry paint go down inside this bottle. I shake that up, and then I pour it into my airbrush, and what happens, my airbrush shoots all those little bits of debris onto what I'm working on, and I end up with a crappy result. So we're going to start from square one. This isn't going to go in the bin. I'm just going to take and put it into a smaller bottle, and that will be used for when I need to use the brush to do touch-up paint work. And what I'm going to do is decant another can of paint into a bigger jar, but this time I'm going to use the puncture method. I'm not even going to shake the can up, puncture it, let the accelerant out, no, not accelerant, propellant out, and then pour that into the can and measure the paint separately, and then pour it into the bottle once it's been measured, and use this as my shaker bottle. And every day at the end of the day, I'm going to make sure I clean the lid and the lip of this bottle. I like this size bottle. It's almost the ideal amount for a day's worth of work, or a session's worth of work for me. But yeah, everything's going good. Let's take you guys over to the workstation. Shaky camera work ahoy! Let's get you some light. I like this new paintbrush a lot. Now, again, I don't have a lot of experience with airbrushes, but this thing has been the bee's knees. I thought it would be too adjustable for me. I didn't think I would need all the adjustment, but I found that it's actually quite useful. And having a metal paintbrush opposed to a plastic one has been so much easier for cleaning. Alright, so an entire can of Caterpillar yellow paint has been decanted into this container. This is a 12-ounce can, and I think that is a 16-ounce container. I can't remember. I do believe it's 16 ounce. And I didn't end up, I was going to do the puncture method and just pour it straight in without mixing it, which makes it so you don't have to degas it as long. But I don't like that method because you end up with the pigment in the bottom of the can, and by shaking it, I'm able to get a better mix out of it. If I were to cut the top off, pour it out, I'd have to find a way to get the stuff out of the bottom of the can. Didn't feel like doing that, so I do still puncture a hole in the side of it to get the last couple drips of paint out. So I will degas this stuff, and then I should be ready to start doing some test painting on some scrap model pieces. The new airbrush setup has been working great. I changed to a different bottle for mixing, and I've been making my measurements with measuring cups, and I've been doing a 1-to-1 mixture on thinner to paint. It may sound a bit heavy, but remember, this paint is already thin because it's coming out of a spray can. I'm also wearing a respirator if I sound kind of weird, but let's go for a test run here. I'll show you guys how things have been coming out. I've been running this brush at about 25 psi, and that seems to be working pretty well. Not bad at all. Alright, now it's time to start doing some of the interior painting. You can see here I have the cab masked off all of the outside so that I can paint the interior. The Caterpillar brown from the 80s. It was called Mojave brown. It was a color that they used from, I think it was 1979 to around 1992. Light coat on first. Important thing to bear in mind is masking tape is really going to test how good of a paint job you did. This paint has been allowed to cure for quite a few days, probably about 5. And you better hope you have a clean prep surface, because you're going to be applying masking tape, and when you remove it, if the surface wasn't prepped before you applied this coat of paint, it's going to pull it off. And places to be careful of are on corners. I've already taped this off to paint the interior. It already took just a little bit of paint off this corner. And then edges as well. A teeny bit of paint came off that edge also, but I'll touch that up with a brush later on. So I'm using my fingernail and I'm basically burnishing it down to this edge just to get it started. And then I'm going to run it over. Use my fingernail to find that next edge. Push it down. Use my fingernail to find the bottom edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to try to mask this area out in between there. Once I install that rollover protection, it blocks this. You can't see it, so I'm not too concerned with making that yellow in between there. It's going to be a little bit of a cheat. And then this part, what simulates the slider, is going to be black as well. There's going to be a wee bit of cheating going on there, but not too much. Always use plastic or wood so that you don't tear through the tape and also end up scoring up your model underneath. You just want to follow that edge around. Alright, so I got everything burnished down. Now we're going to take a nice sharp tool here and just very carefully go across that line. And it looks like I might actually be able to leave that part there. Let's see. Alright, it's time to see how good of a job I did on cutting the masking tape. Not bad. Alright, carefully pop that out. Let's see what we got. As you can see, like when I'm doing this, I'm kind of rolling it towards the direction that it's coming off of. I'm not like ripping it back out and away. So I did get a little bit of paint loss right around there. Just the tiniest bit. Moment of truth. Not bad. Not bad at all. This side, I broke the glue on this when I was putting the tape on there, and that sucked. So I'm going to have to get in there with the paintbrush and touch up some. Oh, that paint is on there kind of strong. Not paint, but glue. Not glue, but tape. This little piece that's on the inside right here is where I'm going to glue the glass in later. Lessons learned. Okay, next time I'm wearing gloves when I do this. So So let's show you the most recent mistake that I just made, and this will be able to polish off, but little bits of dried paint on my finger from where I touched the sides, where I'm touching right now, I just transferred onto there. But I will be able to polish that off. It's just not paying attention to what I'm doing. I'm making extra work for myself here. Alright, so we took some wins and we took some losses here. Let's talk about screw-ups and things that I could not do next time. Touching the fresh paint with my fingers would be maybe a good idea to not do again. The parts that came out great. I didn't get much in the way of bleed with the glue that I put in for the back window, and I also managed to not scratch it, which is awesome. And I didn't bleed any paint onto it as well. So things are looking pretty good. I have some polishing work to do on this paint. I was going to polish it anyways, but now I'm really going to have to polish it. And yeah, just being a little bit more careful and cognizant of what I'm doing. But otherwise, came out pretty good. Alright, here we are. All the parts are laid out, ready to go. All the masking has been taken off. I have also gone through and polished some of the parts that had overspray on them. I even had to repaint a part that I went a little too heavy with the buffing compound. That's this guy right there. But otherwise, not bad. Not a world-class paint job by any means, and not a world-class finishing job either. But for a piece of heavy equipment, I think it's sufficient. I'm pretty pleased with it. We have our finished decals over here. The decals have been done on clear decal paper, and then for the parts that need to be backed in white, I'm just going to put down a strip of white water slide. The reason I didn't print on this is because this is the tester's paper and this stuff sucks. It does not print very well. This is another paper that I picked up from eBay, or not eBay, but Amazon. It's just a clear, and it got really good reviews, and I see why. This is just maybe a $40 DeskJet printer with a combination of Photoshop, and I was able to get this stuff to come out pretty good. On a future episode, I will show you guys how I do decals, but that is not something I'm going to feature here today. So, I need to start cutting out decals and applying them to the models. It's going to be pretty straightforward. I'm going to cut them with an X-Acto blade and then put decals on. I'm not going to film that part because it's boring, and I think this video is probably long enough already. I will, however, show you guys bits and pieces of me putting this thing together, and then once it's all assembled, ready to go, I will reveal the models to you guys. Alright, so I want to show you guys a little thing that I learned how to do with decals. So this is just white decal paper that I've laid down on the material, and I'm going to lay a clear decal over that. So I've taken the decal and I've cut it out approximately the size that I want. Again, it's clear, so the white on here doesn't really matter. And behind the line for the C, I've taken and I've made a cut with the X-Acto knife, but I've only cut through the decal membrane. I haven't cut through the paper. So I'm going to set this off in the water, let it do its soaking, and then apply it over the top of this white decal. Now this white decal has already been set with micro sol. It's just basically like lightened ammonia. I think it's got some other stuff in there. And then there's also micro set, which I'm convinced is just white vinegar because it smells just like white vinegar. But I'm sure there's probably other additives in there as well that help. Microsol is very interesting stuff to use with. That's the one that's in the red bottle. When you paint it on the decal wrinkles up and looks like you just wrecked your decal. Just be patient with it, let it set down, and then you could take like a wet paintbrush to help it out. I'm not going to be putting any more on here because it's got enough on the surface that I think it's going to be plenty for my project. I've also been having little issues with my ink bleeding, even though I hit this stuff with some clear coat. So I'm just hoping I can get this in here quick enough that it doesn't give me any grief. Alright. Work's not done. Remember with decals, as long as the decal is wet, you're in the clear. But once it dries, that's it. It's decal set. So I'll just take a little Q-tip here and just try to push it into position a little bit better. Corner down just a bit. And I think that's pretty good. There we go. A two-stage decal. On the back, we got a Caterpillar logo. We got the decal that I did on the other side. This one had just a tiny bit of issue with the ink, but you know what? I'm not going to cry too much over it. I'm going to show you guys the interior of the enclosed cab before I seal it up. It came out awesome. I really like it. I'm glad I went with a different shade of brown for the seat as well. The lighting's a bit you know what, but not bad. Pretty happy with that. Give you a better look at the decals that I did for the dash. Even got the alert lights on there. I pulled up a picture of the dash for this thing and in Photoshop made the dash. It looks great on the computer, then you print it up and you realize how much smaller it is in scale, but it came out pretty good. This process is going slow and tedious. I'm actually on day 2 of assembling all this stuff because the fit and finish, once you apply paint and forget to scrape paint from certain parts, is a little bit different, but it's been coming along slowly. And this clear decal paper is really good, so I think I'm going to order the white decal paper from them for next time for the decals that I need to do that are white backed like this one, because it did take quite a bit of time cutting up the 2 decals and staging them, and then the dash decals needed white background as well, so that was more time spent laying down that white decal paper. And the white decal paper that I have is terrible. I'll never order that stuff again. It goes down so bad, but you gotta work with what you got. So, all right, lens time. Got our hydraulics here with the light housings on it, and I have 2, I believe they're 4mm, basically fake diamonds, and we're gonna glue these guys in. So I got the tubing down there that matches the same size as our fake diamond. Drop it in. Alright, so now it is seated in that little tube that's in there. It does look a little bit sequiny and reflecty, but we're about to do something to change that. Using that same glue that I really like. Stuff's great. It cures crystal clear. So I'm just going to pour some of it in the back here. A little bead of it in there. Now, when you flip it over, all of a sudden all that shimmery reflectiveness is gone. So we're going to install the body lights. I've taken and dabbed a little bit of the Molotow liquid chrome into there. My first time using these pens, I drank the Kool-Aid and it is good. These are extremely impressive. I've never seen paint this reflective. I wish I would have known about that back in my plastic model days instead of frustrating myself with bare metal foil. Drop a little dab. Now I know I'm gluing to paint, but because that's what experimenting is all about, right? If this was something I was gonna bear like load or weight, I certainly wouldn't be gluing anything to paint, but this is an aesthetic item, so I think it should be okay. Trying to get a grip on this thing to drop it in. Merging jewelry with heavy equipment. Next on KPBS. So, looks like a light. Quacks like a light. It's a light. Alright, now I'm running the hoses in here. I'll show you how I do that. So we have our solid core wire. I'm going to take and pull a little bit off the end here. Grab it. And just grab with my fingers there. Just make sure you straighten it out as much as you can. Don't want any kinks in there. And then just pull the wire right out of it. So that was a bit frustrating trying to get all that done up, but it looks good. I'm happy with it. When these wheels were unpainted and they're just plastic, I was a lot more forceful with this process, but now that I've painted the plastic, I'm trying to be quite a bit more careful because I don't want to nick everything up. Flip this in unison. Okay, I need to line that bar up. Something's catching, okay. Come through and just kind of bleed a dot of paint right onto the top. Myself a better seating position here. I'm also going to get the inside, the ends of the other ones. Alright guys, so I messed up. I knocked over my tripod that holds my camera light and I broke a really nice bulb. But that really doesn't matter because the dozers are done. I'm pretty stoked on it. Looking over them, there's really nothing I think I would have done differently. I learned a lot of lessons while building these things and it took a long time to get them assembled, but they're finally done and I really like the way they look. All the little details turned out the way that I wanted them to. So let's look at the first one. This is the D11, just the dozer with the U-blade on it. A lot of details came out really good. We have our opening and closing door, which is not very easy to get open or to close because it kind of catches on the top, but that doesn't really matter at all. The dozer blade came out great. I'm really glad I took the time to drill all of these out, and it raises and lowers as it should. The tilt functions work fine, and all of the hydraulic hoses that you can see back there all came out really swell. Blocking my impromptu light. The ripper came out well as well. Let's rotate it around this way. You can see the hydraulic pin, and then they actually lower down pretty deep, which also looks really good. They don't go up as high, but again, that was the sacrifice that I had to make for changing everything over. And I think that's about it for the description. The way those came out looks awesome. Oh, can't forget about these little guys right here. Yeah. Oh dear, it looks like I popped hydraulic hose out. It came out awesome. But what about the push cat? Let's have a gander at that, shall we? The push cat came out equally well. Same thing, good depth and movement on the rippers because of changing those hydraulics over. The tracks do roll, but I'm not going to roll them because I don't want to script the paint that's around the edge of all of the rollers in the sprocket. And I'll get you a better look at the interior in a second because that came out great. The blade, the spring action doesn't work as well as I would have liked it to because it kind of catches, but still get the point across. And then this blade is a little bit more difficult to manipulate than the other one, I think because of the angle. As you can see, the outlaw style pipes on it instead of the ones with the rain guards on it. And these decals came out well too. A little square of bare metal foil with the decal printed over it. A close-up of the interior. So there you have it, 2 custom built D11Ns. Alright guys, well I think that concludes this season. Thanks a lot for sticking with me, and I appreciate you putting up with my amateur filming skills and my amateur editing skills and the crappy lighting in my office. But it was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun doing this, and I'm excited about the next season. So stand by, and I'll see you soon. Adios. Ooh, look at the shine off that cranium.